Man, this Novatech exhaust sounds amazing on this thing. We got all the parts on, everything's fixed, it's running great. Let's take it inside and talk about what we did. Man, that thing is a blast to drive, and it sounds absolutely amazing. Everything's gone well. We've got all the parts installed. I'm very happy with the results. We got new mass airflow sensors, a new fuel pump on the driver's side, and we took care of some vacuum leaks it had that was causing codes with emissions or evap system. Let's take a look at the fuel pump and kind of finish this one out, and then we're going to move on to that nice 996 right over there. Let me show you guys the fuel pump. So here's the fuel pump that's removed out of the driver's side, and the pump itself was working just fine. There was nothing wrong there, but the issue was with this cap up top. This little section that has a cross piece of plastic you can see in there, there was a tiny crack. This is the fuel supply that comes out. So inside where my finger is at, it was a tiny little crack, and it would leak fuel. It wasn't spraying yet. We caught it just in time. This is a common issue with the Ferrari 360s. They actually have the fuel pumps not as expensive as you would think they would be because they know it's such a common problem. They're trying to help Ferrari owners out. But as you would go drive for a little while and you come back and you park it, these little chambers here would be full of fuel. And that's kind of scary. And I knew when I talked to the owner of this car, I said, this has to go. It's got to go in the trash because it's going to cause a fire. And he agreed, and we got it fixed. We got a nice new pump in there. This is just some of the costs that come along with owning an exotic car. You're never finished working on an exotic car. You can't say, oh, I got everything cherry, everything's up to snuff, I'm good for a couple years. No, you're not. There's always more costs with an exotic car. Let's go take a look at the 996 over there. This is a 99 Porsche 911. This is the 996 series of 911s, and this one's in fairly good shape. This customer has fixed several things over the years. And what's really cool about what I've done to this car is I've been able to help him keep this one running and keep this one fixed with parts off of Hoovie's Apollo 911 engine, the original engine. You guys remember that, I don't know, it was eons ago, it seems like. We took Apollo 911 and we put an LS2 kit in it. We swapped it to an LS2. And it worked great until Hoovie took it on the track, and the rest is history. But I still have the original motor, which gave out with the IMS bearing and various other things on Hoovie. And there's so many other good parts on the engine. And he's been having issues with this engine, power steering issues, the intake was cracked, various other different things over the several months that we've been working on this. I've been able to save him some money off of Hoovie's old engine, so that's really, really cool. So I was able to save some money with those items, luckily, because on a Porsche, the price to repair these is almost as much as the 360 we just talked about. Now, there are things on a 360 that are leagues above what the cost is on this thing. But you'd be surprised on these Porsches that simple things you would think, okay, 500 bucks, and it ends up being 1,500 bucks. You're like, whoa, what happened? How did it get so high so fast? That's just the way it is on these cars. Parts are expensive. These are very popular amongst people who can afford a $9,000, $10,000, $15,000 911 that needs work. And they think, okay, I can afford the car, I should be able to afford the maintenance, and it gets to be where the maintenance over the next couple of years is as much as they paid for the car. I don't feel sorry for them because that's just the name of the game when it comes with the Porsche 911. The parts are expensive, the labor's extensive on some things. Just the name of the game with one of these. Let's take a look in the engine bay and talk about some of the things we did to this and some of the things we're still in the process of doing to it in the front end. Let's take a look. This is the 3.6 liter flat six that's in these Porsche 911 996s. And it looks pretty hard to work on, all crammed inside of there, but it's actually not too bad. Some of the common issues you can look forward to failing on these is the coolant reservoir. They typically crack and they leak coolant everywhere. You can look at many different of these hoses, and plastic evap hoses and vacuum lines can get cracked over time. We've had to fix a few on this already. And there's also the IMS and the RMS, which is the rear main seal and an intermediate shaft bearing that requires the engine to come out to replace. There are kits that you can do it with the engine in place, but it's a lot tougher. This one, we did an oil change on it recently. No metal particles in the oil filter, everything's nice and clean. He's good to go right now. But why it was in here, you can see those two copper colored fittings right there. Those are power steering lines. The one on the right was just dripping power steering fluid all over the engine, actually causing a misfire. There's little O-rings in between those fittings. Those are designed to come apart, so if you pull the motor, you can just undo the fittings without pulling a whole bunch of stuff apart on the power steering system. And again, like we always do, we replace the old black O-rings with air conditioning HNBR green O-rings, which are a much better upgrade. It should last a lot longer for him. I'll raise this up and we'll show what we found on the underneath. So as you can see, there's this silver metal shield. It's a heat shield right there, and there's the ignition coils underneath there. But the power steering leak we just talked about was pouring all over this area, and it was actually caused the coil to short out and go bad. We replaced the coil and plug, and that misfire went away. We cleaned the area up so that's not happening anymore, and also fixed the power steering leak. We're going to start with that and look around at the engine and work our way forward. Another thing we've had to do to this car is, if you look at this lower oil pan, these bolts look large, and they are, because wherever it was been worked on before this guy owned it, half of these bolts, the original bolts, were stripped out. I mean, they were just, I don't even know how it was even holding the bottom of the oil pan on other than the silicone. I was able to remove this, tap them to the next size up, and put new bolts in, and they're much stronger now than the originals. It's nice and tight. We took care of that issue for him a while back, actually. Here's the oil filter here, and one of the things you can do to check your IMS condition is just to remove it. Don't dump the oil out yet, and dump it into a white container like a plastic jug or something, and just check the oil. Look for metal. It'll look like metallic spray paint or something, lots of chunks. We saw that in Hoovy's when his failed. We removed the oil filter and it was just filled. It had a very fast failure that happened over a short amount of time. It was just like metal flakes all in there. So that's one thing to keep an eye on when you're doing your oil changes on your 996 or 986. And really there wasn't any other leaks or anything to speak of under here, so let's move forward to the transmission. Everything's nice and dry there. He's had no issues with his transmission and it's not leaking, so we're not going to spend a whole lot of time there, but just kind of do a quick check on it. And we'll check these wheels out here. Pads are good. Nothing loose there. We are also replacing his rear sway bar links. You can hear when I rattle it. These are bad in the back. We'll be replacing those. We have new ones actually here to go on. Let's check this side. Brakes are good. Nothing loose there. And this one has a tiny bit of play. You can barely hear it, but we're going to go ahead and just replace them as a pair. CV boots are good. And we'll move forward. A lot of this you can't see. It's just got paneling to cover it up. It's for aerodynamics. Here's our fuel tank. Right there by the front wheels, where you would think there would be an engine, there's an actually a fuel tank. You can see it there as well. We'll check the brakes. We have the struts apart up top. We'll go ahead and check the brakes. They're good. Check over here, and the brake pads are good. We'll go ahead and lower it down, and we'll talk about why we have the front end apart like we do. There's two more complaints that he had with the car. One of them being that the front end had a clunking noise whenever he'd go over bumps. It seems that someone has replaced the front sway bar links and the struts in the past, but they did not do the strut mounts. So I went and road tested it and checked it out, and I verified that the actual strut mounts had failed. That was making this clunking noise. And rather than pull the whole thing apart and pull this yellow strut and all the things out of there, I was able to get the spring compressors just to squeeze the spring enough. It didn't take much that I could take the strut mounts off without the spring flying off or anything. These spring compressors, you have to be careful if you're using them at home. If you don't use them correctly or be safe with your methods, you can break your wrist. You can literally hurt yourself really, really bad. I apologize for the noise. It's the wind blowing on the building today, but if this slips off or if it were to break, it could really hurt you. So be careful with that. Be very careful. But if you're looking for these, they're on an Amazon affiliate page in the description below. There's all kinds of tools that I have listed there, and this is one of them. Let's go take a look at the mounts. So on this shelf here, we have the strut mounts and the strut bearings, everything laid out so I could do an even more in-depth inspection. And as we looked at the strut bearings, you can see this one has been replaced in the past. It's kind of a gold color, and it's still good, I guess, but it sounds kind of rough. This one here was plastic, and it's just destroyed. You can see the little roller bearings in it. You can hear it doesn't sound very good. Even though those are bad, that wasn't making the clunking noise. We are putting new bearings in as well. But as you can see on this strut mount, there's a nice lip of rubber around the center metal. This is metal right here. And it's nice and solid. This one was actually still good, except for one of the studs was stripped out on it by somebody else. And then I pulled the passenger side off and I was inspecting it, and this is what I found. Gone, completely shot. This thing was just rattling and clunking, and when you would turn you would hear a loud squeak, and that was the rubber actually rubbing on this thing. You can see it actually rubbed into the metal on it. So this mount is completely shot. When I saw that, I knew this is the clunking noise that he's having. This will be the solution to his problem. So we priced him these parts and he said, go ahead. So the parts are here. We'll get those installed, and that will take care of his clunking noise altogether. Now let's take a look at the last complaint. Okay, the last complaint that he had on the passenger door is when he would go to open it, it's not doing the window drop. And I'll demonstrate the way it's supposed to work. When you pull the handle, this window should drop just a little bit so it can clear the weather stripping. You see that? And when I close it, it goes back up. You can see that it works properly. So you open the door and it doesn't damage this window seal up here. Now let's go to the passenger side. Now that same thing should happen over here as well. Let's try it. It won't do it. It barely even moves at all. I'm not going to open and close it anymore because I'm not going to damage his weather stripping. But I know from experience from multiple 996s and the 986s, and also the 986 that I used to own a black little Boxster. The only fix for this problem is a new window regulator assembly. There's no tricks, there's no gimmicks, there's nothing you can do. You can check all the forums, the Porsche forums, it's all the same thing. New window regulator, new window regulator. It's the only thing that fixes this. The motor that's inside of there is kind of like a step motor. There's a module inside that can see where the motor's at, and it can lower a certain amount, raise it a certain amount, and it knows where it's at all the time. And finally that fails and it doesn't know where it's at anymore, so it quits doing the window drop completely. Like I said, there's no gimmicks or tricks you can do to fix it. You just have to replace it. So you would say, okay, well, okay, $300 to get a new window regulator. Not on a Porsche 911. I'm charging him $1,200 just for the window regulator. Now keep in mind there is shop markup included in that. Some of you guys might be able to find it cheaper and put it in yourself. If you want to put it in yourself, go ahead. If I'm putting it in, it's going to be shop markup. I don't charge customers what I paid for the parts Neither does Walmart charge their customers what they paid for their products. It's called capitalism, and I'm here to capitalize. That's why this shop's here, to make money. Now, many of you do your own work, and I really welcome that. If you want to get the parts cheaper and do it yourself, have at it. Okay, so I'm glad you guys could follow along on this really nice 996. This guy's actually local, and he actually teaches at the same school that Mrs. Wizard teaches at, doesn't he?
Yeah, he does.
So he's a really nice guy. I enjoy working on his 911 for him, and I've also enjoyed saving him a lot of money on Apollo 911's old parts. Imagine that. Just keep in mind, guys, whether it's a Ferrari 360, a Porsche 911, a Maserati GT, whatever it is that you're buying, they're not going to be Honda Civic prices. They're very expensive to repair. The reason why you can find cars like this so cheap for sale is because even they, the owners, know the cost to repair is so high that the value of the car is so low. If you guys have been following along on Car Trek 2, check out Tavares's channel. It's listed there. You guys have been watching a lot of those. And you saw that I was in the first episode. And you've seen in that video that they bought the cheapest versions of those cars, and there were so many problems with them. Some of them didn't even make it. Tavares's car had lots of issues. Ed's car had lots of issues. It's just the name of the game. If you buy one of these cars, things are going to break, and then that's where you start paying for one of these cars. Not the buying of the car, but it's when you start fixing it. That's where you pay for one of these cars. So if you want to check out what kind of tools I have in the shop, check the Amazon affiliates link in the description below. And if you haven't already, I really recommend you click the subscribe button. We got many more cool videos to come. Thanks for watching.